is I said, I don't want your goal in life to be successful.
Mm.
I want your goal in life to be helpful.
Right.
And so the question we need to ask ourselves is, how can I help?
After talking to some of the most successful business people in the world, today's Ask an Expert realized the underlying theme through all of them was focus. Hi, I'm Joshua Carlsen, co-founder of Propelo Media, and today I sit down with Erik Qualman. He's the founder of Qualman Studios. He's also the author of the award-winning book called Socialnomics. Today he's going to share his new book he's recently come out that can help all of us right now, and it's called The Focus Project. He's going to share his own personal struggles with focus. He's also going to talk about the importance of storytelling and how that can resonate with your target audience. And finally, he's also going to share the importance of understanding what your digital footprint is, as well as your digital shadow. Now let's hear what Erik has to say.
Erik, thank you so much for coming on our Ask an Expert series.
No, it's awesome to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, so I'm big on Genesis stories. You had a desk job back in the day, a number of desk jobs. What was the transition period that took you from working for somebody to creating your own firm?
Yeah, so the short version, as short as possible, I worked at Yahoo back when they were kind of the Facebook of the day. They were a startup. And then I worked for big companies too, like General Motors and AT&T. And then right before I did this full time, I was the head of marketing at Travelzoo. So we took them to be one of the largest market caps, actually the most successful NASDAQ stock when we launched it. So very good ride. And it went kind of like this, up and down,
Yeah.
which you can do. But long story longer, I saw this vision, which MySpace at the time, and I started talking to our board and CEO. I go, we got to get on this. Like, this is the future. And they were listening, but then other people I talked to like, no, that's just for teenagers. And so out of frustration, basically, I wrote a book called Socialnomics to say, hey, guys, this isn't just for teenagers. This is going to change the world. And so Socialnomics was wildly successful, and then away we go. And then I become a speaker and an author. And then along the way, started an animation company because I wanted to explain what digital leadership was and what Socialnomics was in basically 2 minutes. Because I'd have a tough time. I'd talk to some CEO, let's say, for an hour,
Yep.
and then they'd go, got it. And then they wouldn't do anything. I'd go, well, you don't got it because you didn't do anything.
Right.
And so once I made that video to massively viral, I made it so that they go, got it, you got my attention, let's rock and roll. So been very fortunate to be doing that. Now I've spoken in 55 countries. We've reached 50 million people, but we want to reach 7 billion by 2030. So we'll see.
All right. Well, we got some time. Hopefully, we'll get you a few. We'll get you a few more today. I have a question. You brought up Socialnomics. Like, I think that's obviously incredibly important where we are at today. Can you just talk about how you wrote that a decade ago, but what values can still be tied to where we're at right now?
Yeah, it's really interesting to me that it's so slow on how it's moving, to be honest. I mean, some of it's moved super fast, but other stuff I go, oh, wow, we're still talking about that. But the reason I get excited about it is I'm a tech guy, but it's all about relationships. That's really why. It has less to do with technology. So all Socialnomics is, at a very simplified level, is word of mouth on digital steroids.
Yeah.
And so that's it. It's developing relationships digitally. Now that we've been forced to do that this pandemic, because I always say, hey, we're in our car, we're driving along, everything's fine. I'm telling people, hey, digital leadership's coming 3-5 years, and all of a sudden, pandemic comes. Now we're right up against it.
Right.
So you see why Amazon stocks through the roof, because they were prepared for it, not prepared for a pandemic. They were just prepared for the future, and the future got hyper accelerated.
Okay, so let's talk about storytelling, because obviously as a speaker and somebody that has traveled to so many different countries and shared so many stories, what is your process? I have to imagine your storytelling today is a lot better than where it was when you first started. What is the process that you go through in order to engage in an audience?
Whenever I see something compelling, like something personal that happens to me that I think is interesting, I find myself telling people at, say, a cocktail party or just with friends, and I see them lean in, all of a sudden I know to myself the stories that I'm going to tell there, so I don't forget them. I actually use Evernote. I use Google Shared Sheets to make sure I notate the story. Then whatever conference I go to, you've got a smorgasbord, let's say, of stories, 100, and you go, this is like my top 10 story, but how does it apply to them? And you usually, that's where the crafting comes. Okay. I got to shift that lens. Okay, it's a good story, but how do I make it applicable to them? And so usually that's the process. The number one thing is make sure you write down these good stories, because otherwise they'll go away. Like you'll forget them in a couple of weeks.
So how do you validate? I mean, I think at this point in time, you obviously have a good read of the room, right? But how do you evaluate, what's the recommendation to business people that are thinking about crafting a story to see, hey, is this sticky? Does this have, is this going to resonate with the audience, or is it just going to be flat?
I always say think like a comedian.
Okay.
That over time you're going to get your core stuff that works.
Yep.
And then take that 20%. So 20% of the time be testing. And also that fell flat. So you got to be willing to fail fast, fail forward, fail better. Then time is your friend. That over time, I was in Austria and I told this very American, which I didn't know at the time, joke. I don't remember the joke, but I remember someone coming and go, that's very American. They don't want the bells and whistles as much as in Europe as they do in America. So over time you go, this story resonates no matter what country I'm in.
Okay.
This story works in Europe. This story works in the United States. So it's a lot of it's trial and error.
Sure.
But from your gut if people are leaning in when you're telling a story. And then over time you go, that's a good one, that's a good one. So literally sometimes you might tell the same story on stage for 9 years. And then you just see what that wear out is. And then all of a sudden another one comes and you kind of can replace it.
Okay, well, I like your tact of having, Evernote or Google Sheets on hand by, because, I feel like the older I get, the harder it is for me to remember these things. So we got to have these little life hacks. You've got a new book out. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what it is? Because if I'm not mistaken, it's about pursuing less and getting more.
Yeah, it's called The Focus Project. It's the not so simple art of doing less better, better. So what I saw is when I talk, I've been fortunate to be at these big companies, whether it's Godiva, Google, Facebook, NASA. And so you're in the green room, which for those that don't know, that's when you're about to go on stage. They have this kind of calming room where you have food and to help you get ready before you go on stage. And it's usually just reserved for the speakers. And so you meet incredible people backstage. So you got to be careful because you don't want to be all up in someone's grill if they're some of them are noticeably stressed. It's funny, and I'll get back to it, but I was on stage and there's this lady that was standing, this was on the side of the stage, not the green room.
Okay.
And she was, I could tell, very nervous.
Yeah.
But she was also quite tall. And you can't tell, but I'm 6'6", 6'7" when the sun's out. But I was talking to her and I just was trying to ease her, to relax. And then she went out there and they're like, now we're going to talk with and sit down with SI swimsuit supermodel Rachel Hunter. So some of you guys might remember her, but I'm like, oh, that's why her face was so familiar. But when you're in the green room, you talk to some of these folks and it's just like you get all this information from them. And so I started to ask them, wow, you have 30,000 employees. That just blows my mind away. It's giving me stress just thinking about it, that you have 30,000 employees. What's your secret? And they go, my secret's focus. And I go, oh, they go, I can focus just a little bit better than most. And then I ask, well, what's the biggest thing you struggle with? And they go, focus. And then I started to travel around the world, and all of a sudden you get the pattern, focus, focus, focus. And I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, I deal with the same thing.
Sure.
I get done at the end of the day and my hair is on fire. And I go, what the heck did I get done? What's going on? I can control my life. What's going on? So the Focus Project was me doing research around what can help you focus, so the science, and then marrying it up with me as a guinea pig. So that's the streets. I had the street science with the industrial science, married them up. And each month I'd give myself a rating of a kindergarten, like a D, a C. I only got 2 A's.
Okay.
And so the 3 top learnings I learned from the entire project, obviously there's a lot more in the book, but at a super high level. Number 1, I was testing the hypothesis, can focus become a habit? And it can. So focus can be learned, but it's super hard. Like I said, I only got 2 A's, and I know that I'm supposed to be focusing. So it can be really hard, but it can be learned, and it can be trained like a muscle. Second, what do top performers do differently than what we do, or what I was doing, or what most of us, like what separates a top performer from the 1% from the general population.
Yep.
And it's basically they're not smarter or have different resources or have talents. They basically are better at saying no to everything so they can say yes. They're better at saying no to everything, almost everything, so they can say yes to the big things. And secondarily, they don't rely on willpower. They rely on systems and processes.
Okay.
And then the third thing I learned was go for progress, not perfection. Again, I only got 2 A's. So as long as progress meaning, hey, we all know journaling's good for you. We all know it's good for you.
Sure.
So why do we do it? Because we all say I'm going to journal. And then we do it. And then for me, I go, I didn't journal again. So progress would be just to write, as crazy as it sounds, one word.
Yeah.
Because if you write one word, you're probably going to write a sentence, maybe 2 sentences, but that's it. Give yourself a break. Like progress over perfection. So those are the top 3 things. They can be learned. 2, basically say no to everything, rely on systems to do so. And then 3rd, progress over perfection.
So I think that second one is huge, right? I mean, having systems in place just simplifies life, right? Because you've got some sort of process that helps you along the way. But getting to that third one that you mentioned, which is, progress over perfection, you're starting with a word, but really, is it as simple as that? Or is there, I feel like there's almost like there needs to be this catalyst, right? Because I know about journaling, right? But I haven't journaled forever, right? But it's things like exercise or eating right. It's like, once we get going and we have a system in place, it's good. But what's the trick to just really getting started and off the line?
Small steps is the trick. And again, I'm not telling you anything we don't know, but it's like start flossing. The research shows, like if you look at PJ Fogg's research, when he looks at it, floss one tooth. He says it sounds ridiculous because it is. Because if you start with one tooth, then you're going to floss the rest. By the way, interesting learning, if you floss every day, you extend it 6 years. Like you had 6 years to your life. Now the debate is, well, is it because of the health reasons or is it because you do everything else well? If you're flossing, that you do everything else well. But that's another system might be that, okay, I want to get in better shape.
Yep.
So when you brush your teeth, every time you brush your teeth, do a push-up. Now, a lot of us would say, I'm going to do 50 push-ups. And then you stop doing that because it's just too hard. But you can work your way up to 50 push-ups. So it's those small steps. And celebrate the wins. That's the other thing the research showed. And I found that helped me a lot. Okay. So let's say that you always want to have if you have kids like I do, and you just want to have the car clean, every time you park the car in the garage, just pick up one item. And I played basketball in college, so celebrate the win. Like slam dunk it in the garbage. Like, yeah, it's done. And so that research also shows that it helps you just small steps and then celebrate those small victories.
Yeah, that's huge. I don't think we do enough of that because we're so busy, which gets back to the saying no part. How hard was that for you to actually start saying no?
Super hard. I think most of us are people pleasers, and that usually serves us well. When you think about going back thousands of years, a tribe, you want to assimilate. So it's ingrained in us to be people pleasers, and it usually works out well for us. So again, systems can help here. And so you've got to, but it's hard. Like it's practiced, right?
Right.
So a good story there was, so I volunteer at my church. And in a normal non-pandemic world, I'm traveling a ton.
Yep.
And so when I'm home on the weekend, I want to spend as much time with my daughters as I can. When we go to church, I volunteer my time to serve in the youth organization. And generally that means I'm serving so that I'm with my daughters, like in one of their classes, 3rd or 4th grade. And I talked to the volunteer coach, and invariably, they don't have enough volunteers for the boys.
Okay.
And so historically, they'd always say, hey, I know you're signed up to be for this, but – and then I feel like a terrible volunteer, right? It's like, what, I'm only volunteering on my terms?
Right.
But then I guess I go, wait, I'm in the focus project.
Yeah.
So I go, I'm in this focus project. Let's do it. And so I go, well, I'd really appreciate it. I'd love to help the boys, but, I'm traveling a lot to spend time with my daughters.
Right.
And so to their credit, they email me back and go, oh, yeah, that's good, but we really need help with the boys. And I reply back, I copy and pasted the same response. I go, well, I don't know if you saw this. And then they pick me again. Long story longer, I finally said, hey, why don't we do this? It sounds like you've got a volunteer for the 3rd grade girls. why don't we do this? I can take the third grade girls if they want to take the boys. And so generally, to be honest, the boys are a handful at that age. So that's probably, they can't get volunteers.
Sure.
And so they swapped me. So I held to my guns like that. No.
Yep.
And it worked out. It's not always going to work like this. Not always rainbows and unicorns. But it turns out that lady actually had such a good time with the boys that she preferred to then on teach the boys. Now, it's not always going to be that way.
Sure.
But, and I saved that string. It's in the book. I was like, in the moment going, this is glorious. I can put this in. So that's the other thing with storytelling. Whenever you're facing something hard or on a trip, my dad always used to say this, great, now we have a story. Like if the car catches on fire, like great, now we have a story. Because what stories you tell are sometimes that difficulty and how you overcame it or the ridiculous of it.
Well, so you said ridiculous, and you're big on disruptive storytelling. So why don't you talk about what is disruptive storytelling?
Yeah, so when you look at disruptive storytelling, it's not much different from storytelling. Disruptive story, because there's disruption, there's digital transformation, all these terms out there, is that disruptive storytelling is telling one story, but then understanding all the outlets that you can tell that on so that you get to scale. So if we're talking here like we are, and it sounds like you guys are doing this because you guys are smart, you chop up these pieces. So then all of a sudden you have all these different pieces of content. And when it comes to disruptive storytelling on stage, you should always start with something that people are anticipating one thing, and then you say the exact opposite. Right. So when I get up on stage, I might say, hey, you guys are here to listen about digital leadership. You're going to be shocked to know that it's a lot less Jetsons and it's all Flintstones.
Right.
And then that's a good learning too. We talked about earlier, Jetsons and Flintstones. You can't use that and say Asia because they don't know they watch like the Flintstones, but they don't know what the Jetsons are.
Right.
And so you've got to have your bag of tricks. But that's one key that people ask me for speaking or storytelling is I go try to do the opposite of what they anticipate.
Sure.
And then 2, understand the audience. You're going to be a much better speaker if you understand the audience versus your content. What does that mean?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a $100,000 speaker. He was jet lagged. I won't mention who it is. He's actually a good friend. It could happen to any of us. He was on stage in Germany, and one of his core things is he talks about, hey, it's like the Germans and their Panzer tanks coming in during World War II, like a bad thing, basically. Yeah. And then he just, once it came out, he realized, wait, I'm in Berlin. What am I doing? Like it was, and as a speaker, there's like silence, but then there's like deafening silence.
Yeah,
it
right.
gets super quiet. And so it's knowing your audience is huge. I know that sounds like everyone would know that, but they don't. They get focused on their content and they don't understand what's on the paint. So a top question I ask, I always make sure I schedule calls before we go on stage with the company to say like, what's the top challenge? If this is a 42-star performance, not a 5-star, like I want to blow it away. What's a 42-star performance look like for this audience?
Well, and I think that's a good takeaway. It's something I remember one of the founders of Airbnb did, which was, hey, how do we make this experience better? Right? So they went through the exercise and then they're like, that sounds amazing. Now, how do we make it better than that? Right? And they did this over and over and over to constantly improve the customer experience. But it goes back to the one-on-one, which is know your audience in order to be able to provide and add value to that audience. Because if you don't, you're going to make missteps, hopefully not as big as the German Panzers.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's where we got it from Airbnb because they're trying to do an 11-star experience. Brian was, so spot on.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we're in a weird point right now, right? There's a lot of disruption. What's the trick to being disruptive in a disruptive market? You know, how do you stand out when it seems like there's just so much chaos happening right now?
It's tricky. And actually we moved the focus project book forward because a lot of people pinged us saying, hey, we're struggling right now mentally. Sure. We might be physically, some of us are blessed to physically not have coronavirus, but mentally, like I don't know where to focus. And so a couple things. First and foremost, control what you can control. We can't control, obviously, these things that's happening outside of our control. So focus. I got the glasses on. Control what you can control. Do your best. Forget the rest. But the top question you should always ask yourself right now, because there's going to be a lot of innovation that comes out of this. If you look at the top companies, they usually, innovative companies, top performing companies, there's a study on this from Forbes, that they actually come out when times are bad, not when times are good.
Right.
And so innovation is going to be there. So the key question you need to ask yourself, and this is a question that I went over with some recent graduates in a commencement address, kind of talking about starting off with something that they're not expecting, get parents to kind of go, what? Who got this commencement address speaker? Is I said, I don't want your goal in life to be successful. I want your goal in life to be helpful.
Right.
And so the question we need to ask ourselves is, how can I help? And then all of a sudden that answer really leads you to different places. So
sure.
Obviously I own an animation studio. We do stuff like with Disney, big companies, Cartier and IBM. But I asked our team, I go, all right, what can we do to help the world?
Yep.
Don't think about costs, just like, what can we do pro bono?
Sure.
And then we brainstormed and we said, what would be helpful is to make the data visual so we can be disruptive visual storytelling.
Yeah.
So we can show the graphs moving. And we go, okay, how do we do that? Can we do it? And then within 12 hours, we're able to figure out, okay, we can grab the data from here. We can make it visual here. We'll get it on our YouTube channel. We'll do it on TikTok, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, that thing's been going crazy. Someone reposted it on TikTok on their account. I got 20 million views.
Right.
But it's really just showing where's those trends and that change over time. And then each country will go into each country, say on TikTok, and make sure we're using Portuguese language in Brazil, using the terminology that they would, so that we're helping. Obviously, it helps us because it gives us brand awareness, but you don't start with that. You start with, how can I help? And then everything else happens.
Right. Yeah. If you build it, they will come kind of thing, but it starts at the genesis as being helpful. So video, you obviously have been bought in for years. I feel like what's happened, one of the side effects that's positive to me is that video is transformative for so many businesses right now. But I feel like so much of it is internal focused as opposed to external focused. What are things that you're seeing or things that you think businesses should be looking at to start leveraging video as this new medium to connect to their audiences?
We're starting to see the beginning of it, so it's got me excited.
Okay.
But all of a sudden, I always look at, let's say, sales teams. These sports sales teams, most of their sales at these big companies and small businesses come at live events.
Right.
Most of these live events are really just networking opportunities for sales teams, for businesses, partners.
Sure.
That's gone.
Yep.
And how do you cut $1 billion deal if you're selling cloud services to Google? I always said, who's the guy or girl that got that $2.5 billion cloud contract moved over to Google or whatever? It's tough to do. And so with a video standpoint, you can't, right now they've basically left their sales teams naked.
Yeah.
Here you go, like go to Zoom. It's like, what? No. You need to give them something that gets people to lean in, like the video I talked about.
Yep.
The reason I made that video for Socialnomics went massively viral is because I was doing it, and it's funny because I showed it to the publisher at the time. They go, well, why are you excited about this video? It's not going to sell books. It doesn't talk about the book. And it doesn't talk about you. I go, yeah, that's the point. It's supposed to help the viewer.
Right.
And all of a sudden we did that, and I go, the sales will come if you do that.
Sure.
But just for sales teams, they need like 2, 3 minute, 5 minute videos to say, hey, we're going to start off the Zoom call, but here's the purpose of the call. And like do it in a visual format and do it in an animation format. It's like, okay, that's why I'm sitting here. Got it. Let's do it.
Right. No, that's great advice. You've got to feed the sales team with something to go because we are in such a disruptive time. I know we have a hard stop, so I'd love to get you back on. But Erik, I really want to thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. I think there's a lot of good
for 5 more if you got it.
Okay, well, so yeah, I want to get back to go back to the very beginning, which is you're working. Right. And so you wrote a book, right? Like that was kind of this moment that transformed. What was the process? Because I feel like we've heard a lot of people for 5-10 years, which is, hey, write a book, do a podcast. And I feel like so many people go back to baby steps, right? Starting with a small goal. I feel like so many people are just like, I can't do that. I don't have time. I don't know how. What was the process like for you? How did that even start, and how did it continue for you?
No, it's a great question. Everyone writes differently, but it should be helpful. I always say our movie's the same. We just have different actors and actresses. Mm-hmm. And so for me, what I found helpful for that first book, because it was a business book, I'm like, why would I write a business book? But my buddy said, hey, you should write this. I go, all right. And for me, and I found this over time, this is true now when I write today, I just have to carve. I used to start with, I need to write X amount of words. And that was not good, because that can cause a lot of stress.
Yeah.
And so it's like, nope, I'm just going to carve out 30 minutes. And you got to do it in the morning. That's what we learned in the Focus Project as well, is you've got to attack the number one item before the day attacks you.
Okay.
So attack the number one item before the day attacks you. So for me, it's carving out that 30 minutes. Now, sometimes that goes to 3 hours, but it's really just starting. And I might not write anything for that 30 minutes sometimes, or it's garbage. Sure. But you got to stay in that process of writing. Podcasting, you raised it. So it doesn't matter what you're doing, book, screenplay, it doesn't matter. Podcasts, I say, hey, dude, just commit to 20, because they're going to be terrible. Like my first ones at the Super You podcast, it's just listening back, you're like, oh gosh, that's pretty bad.
Right.
You just get better. You're just going to give up. If you only say I'm going to do it, you got to say I'm going to commit to 20. Tim Ferriss, a fellow Austinite, taught me this. He's like, you got to commit to a certain amount. Otherwise, you're just going to give up.
Sure.
And so that's what I'd say. Just kind of put a stake in the sand and then go for it.
So give yourself a long enough runway that you'll get over that initial, like, this is garbage. Oh, I'm actually starting to make progress.
Yeah. And respect capacity. So half hour. Like I was working full time.
Right.
So, all right. I got a half hour. It's funny, now that I have 2 little kids, I'm like, what was I doing with all my time?
Right, because you don't have it now.
How could I have not written like 20 books?
Right. Yeah, I'm so disappointed in myself. You've talked about digital footprint versus digital shadow. Can you share with the audience about that?
Yeah, so your digital footprint is anything that you upload about yourself, your brand, your company, and then your digital shadow is more important because that's what other people upload about you, your product, your service. And so collectively, your digital footprint plus your digital shadow equals your digital stamp. Okay. And all of us have one. 92% of kids under the age of 2 already have a digital stamp today. 25% of the babies born tomorrow already have one today. Parents get excited. They post a sonogram. They post names online. So it's really up to us, both for our individual stamp, which is basically a fancy term for your personal brand,
sure,
which is a fancy term for your reputation. It's up to us to produce our best, then protect it.
Okay. And I guess last question I love asking is, if you can go back in time and you can tell younger you, maybe it's about parenting, maybe it's about writing more books when you don't have kids, but what advice would you give yourself that's something you've learned along the way that you think would be helpful?
Well, tell my college self not to drink so much, but I would say that the best advice if I texted myself or went back in time would be, success is a choice. Give yourself a break. Do the best you can. It's all going to work out.
Sure.
And always go back to think ahead a year. Like when you're in the moment, stressed out, think ahead a year. Go, is this going to matter?
Right.
Or think about, to help you get a context around that, your listeners and viewers, just look back, try to remember something you're super stressed out about a year ago.
Sure.
And go, that's ridiculous. There's no bearing of what I'm doing right now. So it gives you, in the moment, which is really hard to do, allows you to pause and try as best you can to control and just move forward.
Well, good advice. I think the timing of your book, I'm glad you ramped it up because the Focus Project, I think that's something that everybody needs to be, pun intended, but focused on right now because there's just so much going on and we should really try to, clear out as much of that as we can so that we just stay focused on what's important. So, Erik, I want to thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate having you.
No, awesome to be here. Thank you so much. If I can help with anything, let me know.
Okay, thanks.